The stars glittered in the endless void, an eternal audience to humanity's conquests. Admiral Kane stood at the helm of the flagship, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the vast armada of human warships stretch out before him like gleaming predators poised to strike. The Earth Federation fleet had grown accustomed to victory, their banners raised high above the ruins of countless alien civilizations. Today would be no different. He leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing as the target of the day came into view, a ragtag collection of alien vessels, pitiful and primitive, hovering uncertainly in the distance. A laugh rumbled in his throat as he glanced at the tactical display. "Is that it?" Kane smirked, raising an eyebrow toward Commander Harlan, his second in command. "This is the great threat everyone's been whispering about." Harlan shifted, his face equally amused but hiding a faint flicker of unease. "The S-Car, some kind of scattered nomadic species. Reports say they've been uniting recently, but by the look of them, I'd say this won't last long." Kane chuckled, the sound devoid of any real humor. "Well, let them have their little moment of unity. It'll make the cleanup easier when we vaporize their fleet." He turned toward the bridge crew, all of them busying themselves with final preparations. "You see, Commander, that's what these aliens never understand. They can band together all they want, but it won't change the fact that they're up against us. Humanity. We conquered the Alvith. We brought the mighty Zorxians to their knees. And these S-Car." He waved a hand dismissively. "They'll be nothing but a footnote." The crew members nearby exchanged smirks, and Harlan nodded, though his expression remained stiff. "Still, sir, we should probably assess their capabilities before." Kane cut him off with a sharp wave. "Assess? What's there to assess? Look at them. Their ships look like they were patched together with scrap metal and prayers." He glanced out the viewport, eyes glinting with arrogance. "We've seen this time and time again. A cornered alien species thinks it can hold the line, makes some desperate moves, and crumbles the moment they face our firepower. It's all the same, and it's always been the same. We are the dominant force in this galaxy. Commander. Everyone else is just temporary." Harlan hesitated, casting a glance toward the alien fleet. "I suppose you're right, sir." Kane didn't miss the pause in his voice, but he brushed it off. "Of course I'm right. Now, let's remind the galaxy of that. Prepare the fleet for engagement. Standard formation. No need for anything fancy today." "Yes," Admiral Harlan replied, but there was a slight tension in his voice, one that Kane ignored. The bridge buzzed with activity as the crew carried out his orders. The warships adjusted their positions, aligning in perfect synchronization, their massive cannons trained on the distant alien fleet. Each vessel gleamed under the starlight, pristine and powerful, as if they were the very embodiment of human supremacy. Kane allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, watching as his fleet prepared to engage. He had been in countless battles, and the outcome was always the same. These S-Car, whoever they were just another in a long line of species who thought they could resist humanity's march across the stars. Shields up. Weapons primed, a lieutenant called from his station. "Ready for your command, sir?" "Excellent." Kane's lips curled into a sneer. "Let's put these savages out of their misery." "Admiral," a voice called from behind, one of the tactical officers. "We've detected an energy signature coming from their lead ship. It's faint, but unusual." Unusual how Kane's voice carried a slight edge of irritation. The officer hesitated. "It doesn't match any known S-Car technology. It's too refined for their level of development." Kane waved it off. "Probably scavenged it from some other species they crossed paths with. It's nothing to worry about. These aliens are known for picking apart the remains of better civilizations. They're thieves, not engineers." Harlan, who had been standing quietly beside him, frowned. "Still, sir, perhaps we should analyze it more closely before." "Before what?" Commander Kane snapped. "Before we annihilate them? We've already given them more time than they deserve. They're not even worth a proper engagement. We'll hit them hard, fast, and it'll be over before they realize what happened." "Yes," Sir Harlan muttered, stepping back into line. His eyes flickered toward the tactical readout, but he said nothing more. Kane's fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of victory. There was something exhilarating about these moments, the calm before the storm, when the outcome was still in his control. Fire the first volley. Let's give them a show before we end this. The order rippled through the bridge, and moments later the human fleet's forward cannons roared to life. Beams of searing energy shot out into the void, cutting through space toward the alien fleet with terrifying precision. The crew watched with anticipation, some even smirking, waiting for the inevitable outcome. But then, something happened. The energy beams that should have torn through the alien ships didn't. Instead, they dissipated harmlessly against some kind of shimmering field, a defense mechanism the humans had not expected. For a split second, silence reigned on the bridge. "That's impossible," one of the officers whispered. "Their shields shouldn't be able to withstand that kind of firepower." Kane's smirk faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "Must be a fluke. Adjust the targeting systems and fire again. I want that fleet reduced to rubble." The second volley was unleashed, even more powerful than the first, but the result was the same. The alien ships, once thought to be primitive and weak, remained untouched, their shields absorbing the full force of humanity's attack with ease. A murmur of disbelief spread through the bridge. Kane's jaw clenched. "Increase power to the cannons. I don't care how much energy it takes. I want those ships destroyed." Sir Harlan's voice was quiet but steady. "Maybe we should reconsider our approach." "Reconsider?" Kane's voice rose. "Reconsider what?" "We are the Earth Federation fleet, the most powerful military force in the galaxy. We do not reconsider, we conquer." Harlan said nothing more, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. The arrogance that had filled the bridge only moments ago was beginning to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. Kane refused to acknowledge it. This was just a minor setback, a glitch in their systems, nothing more. They had faced worse before and still emerged victorious. These aliens were nothing compared to the foes they had already defeated. He would remind them of that soon enough. The human fleet was a sight to behold. Rows upon rows of gleaming warships floated in perfect formation, their metallic hulls reflecting the distant light of a blue star. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, equipped with the most advanced technology humanity had ever created. The flagship, Indomitable, led the charge, its massive cannons bristling with barely contained energy. Flanking it were destroyers, cruisers, and support vessels, all designed to function with ruthless efficiency. Every inch of these ships screamed power. Shields stronger than any in known space, capable of withstanding the most devastating attacks, encased their exteriors. Their weapon systems were cutting-edge, boasting quantum lasers, railguns, and EMP bursts that could disable entire fleets in seconds. Inside, they housed the most advanced artificial intelligence, calculating trajectories, tactics, and contingencies with cold precision. The fleet wasn't just a military force, it was a statement of humanity's dominance. The bridge crew of the Indomitable moved with an air of supreme confidence. This was another routine engagement, another species to remind of their place in the grand order of the galaxy. Humans were the conquerors, the masters of space, and nothing could stand against them. Status report, Kane barked, eyes still glued to the alien ships ahead. "All systems operational," Lieutenant Reyes replied promptly. "Shields at maximum efficiency, weapons charged and ready. The fleet is holding position, awaiting your command, Admiral." Kane nodded, satisfied. He glanced at the tactical display, his lip curling at the sight of the enemy fleet. They were pathetic, an assortment of ships, mismatched and cobbled together, like relics from an ancient time. The S-car ships looked as though they'd been scavenged from the wreckage of long-forgotten wars. Their hulls were jagged, uneven, with exposed wiring and makeshift repairs visible even from the distance. No formation, no cohesion, just drifting, waiting. "Look at them," Kane muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It's like they pulled those ships out of a junkyard." "They don't seem to understand who they're up against," Harlan remarked, a faint hint of amusement in his voice. No, they don't, Kane agreed, his voice dripping with disdain. They're not prepared for this. Not in the slightest. The contrast between the two fleets was staggering. The human warships, sleek and polished, seemed to embody the peak of technological evolution. Every line, every angle was designed for maximum efficiency. Their weaponry was designed to annihilate, their armor impenetrable, their strategy flawless. In contrast, the S-Car ships looked like they had been pieced together from the remains of other defeated civilizations. They seemed clumsy, almost archaic, with parts that didn't quite fit, as if they had been scavenged from scrapyards. But there was something about the way those ships drifted in space that felt off. Their movements were too calculated, too deliberate, despite their rough appearance. But Kane wasn't interested in subtlety. He had seen enough alien races attempt last-minute tricks, and it always ended the same way: human victory. "Sir, I'm reading unusual energy fluctuations from their ships," one of the tactical officers reported. "It's not consistent with anything we've encountered before." Kane waved a hand dismissively. "That's because they're primitives, Lieutenant. They probably don't even know how half their systems work. Some scavenger race pieced their fleet together, and now they think they can stand against us." His voice was filled with scorn. "We'll show them what real technology looks like." Still, Harlan began cautiously, their formation. "It's strange. It's like they're waiting for something." Kane shrugged off the observation. "They're waiting for us to wipe them out. Nothing more." The S-Car ships seemed to pulse with a dull, greenish glow, an effect that made them appear even more outdated. There were no visible weapon ports, no clear signs of defenses, just jagged, uneven ships drifting in the vastness of space like ghosts. A few of them flickered erratically, as if their systems were barely holding together. Pathetic, Reyes muttered under his breath, clearly reflecting the sentiment of the entire crew. Kane smirked. Exactly. Despite the dismissive tone, something lingered in the air, a tension that not everyone seemed to notice. The humans were on top of the world, their arrogance as strong as their weapons, but the S-Car ships were moving too deliberately for a race on the brink of annihilation. They weren't retreating. They weren't scrambling. They just hung there, waiting, as if they knew something the humans didn't. Kane's attention shifted momentarily as a warning light blinked on one of the consoles, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. Nothing to worry about, he said to himself, too focused on his imminent victory to give it a second thought. The fleet was ready, the battle would be swift, and once again, humanity would prove its superiority. Yet, as the fleets hovered in that eternal, silent moment before the storm, the S-Car ships seemed to shift ever so slightly, a flicker of movement that went unnoticed by most. They weren't retreating, weren't scrambling for defense. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Kane's smirk deepened, oblivious to the quiet hints of what was to come. "Let's get this over with," he said, voice dripping with overconfidence. No one on the bridge, least of all Kane, could have imagined how wrong they were. Fire at will. Kane's voice boomed across the bridge, echoing with the confidence of a man who had seen countless battles end in his favor. The command was met with immediate action as the forward cannons of the Indomitable roared to life. Beams of searing energy shot out into the vastness of space, streaking toward the waiting S-Car fleet. All across the human armada, ships followed suit, releasing a barrage of high-powered lasers and missiles. For a brief moment, the human fleet's overwhelming firepower painted the void with light. The streaks of energy tore through the blackness like divine judgment, each shot aimed with deadly precision at the ragged S-Car ships. From the humans' perspective, the battle was over before it began. This was what they did. After all, dominate, conquer, leave nothing standing in their wake. Kane leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smirk tugging at his lips. "See, Commander," he said, his voice smug. "I told you, these aliens are no different than the rest. They'll fold before they even realize what's happening." Harlan nodded, though there was a shadow of hesitation behind his eyes. "Yes, sir. It looks like we've caught them off guard." The tactical officer glanced up from his console. Initial volley landed successfully. Minor shield disruption on the enemy vessels, but no critical damage. Kane's smirk widened. Of course not. That was just a warning shot. They'll be begging for surrender soon enough. Yet, as the energy beams closed in on their targets, something unexpected happened. The S-car ships, which had seemed almost stationary moments ago, began to move, not in a panic or retreat, but in a strange coordinated dance. They darted unpredictably, twisting and spiraling through space with an agility that defied their bulky, makeshift appearance. The energy blasts that should have torn through their shields and obliterated their hulls missed by mere meters, grazing harmlessly past the alien vessels. Kane's eyes narrowed, his smirk faltering for the first time. What? There. Evading, sir, the tactical officer said, his voice uncertain. It's like they anticipated the attack. Impossible, Kane muttered. No one can anticipate fire from this distance. But the S-car ships weren't moving in random patterns, they were reacting with precision, darting in and out of the human firing lines with a grace that didn't match their rough appearance. Even more troubling, the scattered formation that had initially seemed chaotic was beginning to coalesce into something more deliberate, more tactical. They're scattering. Why aren't they retreating? One of the officers muttered under his breath, his voice thick with confusion. Kane clenched his jaw, his eyes fixated on the tactical display. They're not retreating because they think they have a chance. Fools. Increase firepower. Let's see how they dodge when we ramp up the intensity. Harlan glanced at Kane, a sliver of doubt creeping into his voice. Sir, maybe we should. We should nothing, Commander Kane snapped. They're just lucky. A few lucky moves won't save them from what's coming. The human fleet unleashed another volley, this one more powerful than the last. Cannons flared to life, sending an even deadlier stream of destruction toward the S-car ships. The barrage should have been overwhelming, but again the alien vessels moved with uncanny precision. They dodged and weaved through the chaos, their movements almost preternatural in their timing. It was as if they knew exactly where each shot would land before it was even fired. Kane's grip on his armrest tightened as he watched. How are they doing this? The tactical officer shook his head, his fingers flying across the console in an attempt to track the erratic movements of the enemy ships. I can't get a lock on them, sir. Their movement patterns are inconsistent. Inconsistent? That's an understatement, Harlan muttered under his breath, watching as the S-car ships continued their dance of evasion. It's like they're reading us. That's absurd, Kane growled. They're just getting... But luck didn't seem to be the explanation. The S-car were moving with purpose now, not fleeing, but maneuvering as if they had studied the humans' tactics, learned their weaknesses. What had once appeared to be a primitive and disorganized fleet now seemed to possess a tactical brilliance that defied the humans' expectations. They're not breaking formation, Harlan observed, his voice quiet but tense. They're moving closer, but they're not trying to flee. They're reorganizing. Kane refused to believe it. Reorganizing? With what? Scrap metal and outdated tech? No, they're just making a last stand before we blow them out of the sky. As he spoke, the S-car ships shifted again, and for the first time they opened fire. But the shots weren't random or haphazard. They were precise, deadly. Their beams of green light cut through the darkness, and before the humans could react, 2 destroyers in Kane's fleet shuddered under the... They've hit the Vanguard, and the Eclipsan officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Kane's smirk was gone. His face hardened into a scowl as he stared at the display. What the hell just happened? They hit our engines, the officer stammered, his voice trembling. We're losing power to the rear sections of both ships. Impossible, Kane snapped. Their weapons shouldn't be able to penetrate our shield. But the evidence was undeniable. The once dismissed alien ships were now striking back, and they were hitting critical targets with frightening accuracy. Harlan's voice was low, but there was no hiding the concern. Sir, They're not what we thought. Kane didn't answer. His mind raced, grappling with the sudden shift in power. The S-Car weren't retreating because they didn't need to. They had played the humans from the start, luring them in with the illusion of weakness. And now, with the humans on the offensive, the S-Car had begun to show their true strength. "They've outmaneuvered us," Harlan whispered, a statement more of realization than accusation. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Kane felt something he had not felt in years. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Admiral Kane's earlier confidence had evaporated like mist in the sunlight. His fingers dug into the armrest of his command chair as he watched the S-Car ships move with a grace and purpose that defied everything they had assumed. What had once been a ragtag fleet of mismatched vessels now operated with eerie coordination, like a swarm of predators closing in on their prey. "They've outmaneuvered us," Harlan repeated, more urgently this time. His eyes were glued to the tactical display, where the alien ships continued to shift positions, drawing closer to the human fleet with every passing moment. Kane scowled, refusing to accept what was happening. "They're still just scavengers. I don't care how fast they're moving, we have the firepower to wipe them out. Send in the second wave." "Admiral, we should consider." "I said send in the second wave." Kane's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the growing uncertainty on the bridge. The crew hesitated for only a second before obeying his order. Cannons flared to life once more, unleashing another storm of energy toward the advancing alien fleet. This time, however, something was different. As the beams of energy closed in on the S-Car ships, they seemed to shimmer then vanish. What the Harlan started, but before he could finish, the tactical display erupted into chaos. The alien ships, once visible and vulnerable, had disappeared from the scanners. The entire fleet was gone, leaving nothing but an empty void where they had once been. "Where did they go?" one of the officers shouted, frantically adjusting his control. "They can't have just vanished," Kane snapped, his eyes darting between the viewport and the display. "Find them." "They're not cloaked in any traditional sense, sir," the tactical officer stammered. "They're gone. Our sensors aren't picking up any residual energy signatures." Harlan's voice was low, his tone one of growing realization. "This wasn't random. They've been planning this from the start." Suddenly, a proximity alarm blared through the bridge, and the tactical display lit up once more. The S-Car ships reappeared, but now they were behind the human fleet, perfectly positioned in an attack formation. "They're right on top of us," an officer cried, his voice cracking with fear. Kane's stomach lurched. How could they have gotten there? No species had technology that could pull off a move like that. This wasn't some desperate act of survival. The S-Car were toying with them. The human fleet, the Earth Federation's pride and joy, had just been outmaneuvered by an enemy they had underestimated at every turn. "They've been watching us the whole time," Harlan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've been studying us." Before Kane could respond, the alien fleet opened fire. But unlike the disorganized volley of the earlier skirmish, this attack was precise, surgical. Green beams of energy sliced through space, cutting into the human ships with pinpoint accuracy. Shields that should have been impenetrable failed instantly under the onslaught, and hulls that had been designed to withstand the most devastating weapons cracked like eggshells. "The Vanguard is down," a voice shouted, panic breaking through the crew's professional veneer. "We've lost the Eclipse. Multiple ships are reporting critical damage." Kane stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Ships were blinking out of existence, their icons disappearing one by one as the alien fleet tore through them. "How is this possible?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The answer was clear, even if Kane refused to accept it. The S-Car had never been the weak, scavenging race they had seemed. They had been hiding their true strength, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their ships, which had appeared crude and disjointed, were now revealing hidden layers of technology far beyond anything the humans had imagined. Cloaking devices, biological hulls that could adapt and shift, and weapons systems that had clearly been designed to counter human technology. The aliens had played them perfectly. Kane's hands clenched into fists. We need to regroup. Pull the fleet back. And before he could finish, the Indomitable shuddered violently. Alarms blared across the bridge as the lights flickered, and sparks flew from several consoles. The crew scrambled to regain control, but the damage was done. "We've been hit," the tactical officer shouted, his voice high with panic. "They've breached our rear shields. Engines are offline." Kane's heart raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to win. They always won. "Activate emergency protocols," he barked, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Reroute power to the forward shields and—" "They're targeting our command centers," Harlan interrupted, his voice grim. "They know exactly where to hit us." Kane's breath caught in his throat as realization crashed over him. The S-car had been watching them, analyzing their every move. Every shot they fired was calculated, aimed directly at the human fleet's weak points. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were dismantling the humans piece by piece. "They've outclassed us," Harlan said, his tone hollow. "We never stood a chance." Kane's mind raced, trying to find a solution, an escape, but the truth was undeniable. They had walked into a trap, blinded by their arrogance, and now they were paying the price. The human fleet, once the pride of the Earth Federation, was being torn apart by an enemy they had thought inferior. Sir Harlan said quietly, "We need to retreat." Kane opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. The fleet was in shambles, and the aliens were closing in for the kill. There was no fight left to win. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kane felt fear. The kind of fear that came from realizing you had underestimated your enemy so completely that there was no coming back. The Indomitable shuddered violently, as if it were a wounded beast struggling to stay upright. The once pristine walls of the bridge were now marred with cracks and flickering lights, while alarms screeched endlessly in the background. Kane gripped the edge of his console, his knuckles white, as another blast rocked the ship. He could hear the groans of metal buckling under the relentless assault, the very bones of his flagship breaking apart under the strain. "Shields are down to 20%, one of the officers shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Hull breaches on multiple decks." Kane's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the tactical display. The once mighty human fleet was in tatters, their sleek ships torn apart by the sudden ferocity of the alien attack. The S-car ships, no longer the disorganized rabble they had appeared to be, moved with lethal precision. They weaved between the human vessels like predators circling their prey, their green energy beams cutting through human armor as if it were paper. "They're everywhere," an officer cried out, panic breaking through his voice. "We can't get a lock on their movements." "How are they doing this?" Harlan muttered, his eyes wide as he watched the destruction unfold. "It's like they know exactly where to hit us." The alien fleet had fully revealed its strength. What had once appeared to be mismatched, scavenged vessels were now coordinated weapons of war, each one outfitted with technology that far surpassed the humans' understanding. Their ships moved as if they were alive, organic and shifting, adapting to the battle in real time. Cloaking devices activated and deactivated with seamless fluidity, allowing the S-car to appear and disappear at will, striking from the shadows and vanishing before the humans could retaliate. The Indomitable shook again, harder this time, and sparks flew from one of the consoles. Kane could barely hear the crew's frantic attempts to regain control over the roar of explosions. He glanced toward Harlan, who stood frozen, his face pale as he watched the destruction of their fleet unfold. "This can't be happening," Kane whispered, his voice barely audible. But it was happening. All around them, human ships were being torn apart, their once mighty armada reduced to little more than floating wreckage. Each explosion in the distance was another ship lost, another crew obliterated by the S-car's relentless firepower. "They're targeting our engines," Sir Harlan said, his voice hollow. "They're cutting off our escape." The truth of it sank in heavy and cold. The S-car weren't just fighting for survival, they were systematically dismantling the human fleet. Each shot they fired, every maneuver they made was part of a calculated plan. They had studied the humans, learned their tactics, their strengths and weaknesses, and now they were exploiting every flaw with deadly precision. Kane's mind raced, desperately searching for an escape, a countermeasure, but there was none. The human fleet, once the dominant force in the galaxy, had walked into a trap. The S-Car had been playing the long game, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal their true power. And now, humanity was paying the price for its arrogance. "We can't hold them off," one of the officers shouted, his voice breaking with fear. "Our weapons can't even break through their shields." Another explosion rocked the ship, and the lights on the bridge flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the crew. The air was thick with tension, with fear, as the full scope of their mistake became clear. "We need to retreat," Harlan said, his voice firm despite the chaos around him. But Kane knew there was no retreat. The S-Car had cut off their escape routes, surrounded them with precision and ruthlessness. The once invincible human fleet was being systematically destroyed, outsmarted at every turn by an enemy they had thought inferior. As the flagship shuddered under another blast, Kane closed his eyes, the weight of their defeat crushing down on him. This was the end. The humans had underestimated their enemy, and now they would pay the ultimate price. The S-Car had shown their true power, and humanity's reign over the stars was crumbling into dust. Another violent tremor rippled through the Indomitable, and Kane opened his eyes just in time to see a section of the ceiling collapse in a shower of sparks. A deafening alarm echoed through the bridge, warning of imminent failure in the ship's core systems. The screens flashed red, and the lights flickered again, casting the bridge in a flickering, hellish glow. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Resolute and the Valiant," an officer called out, her voice tight with panic. "The fleet is down to less than 30% operational capacity. We can't." She didn't finish. The console in front of her erupted in flames, and she fell backward, her scream lost in the deafening roar of the ship's failing systems. Kane stared at the chaos around him, feeling utterly powerless. His entire career, he had been a symbol of humanity's dominance, the man who led fleets to victory after victory. And now he stood amidst the wreckage of that arrogance. They hadn't just lost a battle, they had lost everything. The pride, the confidence, the belief that they were untouchable. "Admiral, we have to abandon ship," Harlan shouted, grabbing Kane's arm, shaking him out of his stupor. "We can't stay here." For a moment, Kane considered arguing, clinging to the last shreds of his pride. But as another explosion rocked the ship, he realized there was no point. This wasn't a tactical retreat. This wasn't a repositioning. This was survival, barely. "Get to the escape pods," Kane ordered, his voice breaking through the chaos. All personnel abandoned. The crew scrambled, some limping, others dragging their wounded comrades, as they raced toward the escape pods. Kane and Harlan moved quickly, dodging fallen debris and flames as they made their way through the crumbling flagship. The sounds of battle outside the eerie silence of space, punctuated by distant explosions, was a grim reminder of how thoroughly they had been defeated. As they reached the pod bay, Kane cast one last glance out of the viewport. The sight before him was devastating. What had once been a proud fleet of ships was now little more than floating wreckage, slowly drifting through the void. Fires burned through hulls, and debris floated in the blackness, marking the graves of thousands of human lives. The S-Car ships hovered in the distance, their strange, organic shapes illuminated by the fires of the human fleet. They weren't moving now. There was no need. They had already won. Kane's chest tightened as the full weight of their failure pressed down on him. All the lives lost, all the arrogance that had brought them to this point, it had all been for nothing. They had underestimated their enemy, and now they were paying the ultimate price. Admiral Harlan called, his voice urgent as he gestured toward the last escape pod. "We have to go." With one last look at the broken fleet, Kane nodded and stepped into the pod. The door sealed shut, and moments later they were launched into the void, fleeing the wreckage of their once proud armada. As the escape pod drifted through the debris field, Kane sat in silence, staring blankly out the viewport. The S-Car had outsmarted them at every turn. The humans had been so blinded by their arrogance that they had never considered the possibility that the S-car were anything more than a nuisance. "We thought we were invincible," Kane muttered to himself, his voice hollow. "We thought." His words trailed off, lost in the weight of the moment. The truth was undeniable now. Humanity was not the dominant force they had believed themselves to be. The galaxy was far more dangerous, far more complex than they had ever imagined. And the S-car had shown them that in the most brutal way possible. Kane closed his eyes, feeling the cold emptiness of space all around him, pressing in on his chest. He had survived, but the price had been far too high. They had entered this battle believing they would emerge victorious in minutes, but now all that remained was the wreckage of their arrogance. In the silence of the pod, with nothing but the distant stars as witnesses, Admiral Kane realized something that chilled him to his core. They had never been the predators in this galaxy. They were the prey.